everybody, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we are talking about episodes 10 and 11 of Survivor Second Chance. So, Mike, theories? Why did they double up this week?
Probably because they needed to get done in a certain amount of time, and there was enough interesting stuff to not have to do a double elimination. Whatever the show that follows it probably didn't have an episode for this week, so they had an hour to kill.
Could be
what I'm thinking. They needed a double elimination. They had an hour. They had interesting content, so they made 2 episodes.
Yep, works for me. It was an interesting couple of episodes back to back. This just continues to be a really good season in the sense of people are playing the game in interesting ways.
Yep.
Let's just go ahead and we start at the beginning, all the way back at the beginning of the first episode. We're coming back now from the end of the previous episode where Kelly Wigglesworth was sent home in a something that was, there were certain people not in on that plan, and so Jeremy is needing to try to recover that a little bit, because his intention is to still stick with that main group aside from this little detour that they just took.
Yes.
So in particular, Tasha is the closest ally that was not informed of what was going to happen. So he approaches her, and they're talking about, going back to it being maybe Sierra that would be next. And so Tasha is, of course, because this is the way you play Survivor, she says to him, "Oh yeah, no, I get it." To the camera, she says, "They had one chance and that was it." So, although at the same time, that doesn't mean that she's not going to continue voting for them necessarily, but it sounds like she is less interested in doing it out of loyalty, because they've already demonstrated once that they would leave her out of the plan, even when it didn't involve her.
Right. Well, and I do like that she kind of gave it the, I'll let them do this once. I'll continue to trust them with a little bit of wariness. Mm-hmm. But if they do this again and they betray my trust again, then I am not even entertaining those thoughts,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that I guess her confessional there could be taken both ways, because I kind of took it as it's like they're not getting a second chance. They had one chance and that was it, and they blew it.
See, I took it as they had one chance to make a move without informing her, and they have burned that, and now so there are no more chances.
Fair enough. And certainly her behavior makes it seem like that's more of what she meant. I took it the other way initially, but she didn't seem to hold a grudge too much about it. We didn't really get a lot of confessional from her in these 2 episodes. Let's see. We have Joe, of course, understandably annoyed that one of the people that he thought of as most loyal to him is now gone.
Yeah.
But, it's kind of all the more reason. Got to win the next immunity, except sometimes, even if he doesn't win the next immunity, people will find a way to screw it up. But that's later.
Right. Yeah, you can see where he's coming from, because he took it for exactly what it was, which was, this wasn't really about Kelly Wigglesworth having great relationships with people. This was we can't vote Joe, so we'll take the next closest person to him. Mm-hmm. Which I know we debated that back and forth a little bit last week, and this seemed to solidify that that's how he was feeling, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things where sometimes we just have to take the player's word for it, because Even if we don't necessarily see them being so close, if people are saying they're close, it might just be because they're seeing more than we do.
Yeah. Well, and he clearly had said that was one of his closest allies. So.
Yeah. So in any case, everybody is miserable from the rain. And I thought it was nicely illustrated even early on how much rain there was by showing the time lapse of their collecting drinking water in those cups and just showing it filling up.
Yep.
And then, of course, that's making everybody not only miserable, but it's inhibiting strategy because everyone's huddled together in one big clump. You can't pull people aside and have one-on-one conversations. So I wasn't. Was there something more to it, you think, when Abby said, "See, I told you, first there's thunder and then there comes lightning"? Because
No, I think they just showed that because it was funny how she has the order backwards.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was all it was just like kind of let us laugh at her struggling with language and feel guilty.
I wondered if what she was talking about that they didn't show us, because it could have been that they were hearing thunder in the distance before they were seeing any lightning, and she predicted that they were going to see lightning because she was hearing thunder, as opposed to literally not knowing which order they come in. But they didn't show us anything to lend context to that, so it seemed just kind of like a weird thing to have her say, except that they just wanted someone to say something about there being thunder and lightning so they can show us some thunder and lightning.
That could very well be it.
I made a note of it just because it struck me as odd, not even just in terms of the order, but just I wasn't clear what was. It was like, "See, I told you." Okay, but anyway, that doesn't seem terribly important in the long run. We get some of the first stuff we've had from Keith in a while, which is just saying, like everybody else, the rain is kind of miserable. This isn't fun, but he's also kind of saying, but you stick it out. That's what you do. You're not coming here because it's fun. You're trying to win a competition.
Yes. And he gave us the obligatory, I think we get this about once a season now, where it's, people think that Survivor is fun, but I tell them it's not. It's really miserable and hard work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Somebody always has to say that, whether it's Probst or a contestant.
Nowadays. Yeah. You have to be reminded. Although, just
Probst will remind us in the post season recap or whatever that thing's called.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He'll show this stuff and be like, people always say that they think it would be fun, and are they really that miserable? And clearly they are. This is a really hard show.
Yeah. Well, it just continues to be an ongoing theme where people who have wanted to be on the show for a long time finally get a chance, and then they go on and it's miserable, and they say, "Oh, this is so much harder than I thought it would be." I guess it's, one of the other things they say is that just unless you've done it, it's really just, you can't completely understand what it's like. Although I can see, because at the same time I was about to say, people who have been in real life survival situations probably have an idea. But even that is subtly different because this has both the physical elements and also that paranoia pressure, that element, Yeah. I think that's probably pretty uncommon. But so when we go to the reward challenge, it's funny that they pitch that the reward is you get to go inside where there's blankets and no rain. And also food in a Cambodian circus, but that was almost like a secondary thing.
Yes.
So the challenge itself full contact water basketball, essentially.
Yep.
3-on-3. Although technically teams of 5, but 3-on-3 for each round. So this was a challenge redo where it's interesting that almost all of the challenges so far where they've mentioned who had done it before, it was always a case where that person hadn't done well or something. So it's like, do they get a second chance or whatever? But in this case, it was like, nope, not only was Steven on the winning team, but he scored the winning goal.
Yep. But this is a good challenge. So
yeah, it was really rough too. It's just like
it always is. I mean,
yeah. I mean, the water. I think also, in some ways, that almost gives them license. Is not really what I mean. They can be a little rougher in terms of just like throwing each other down and stuff because the water's there. But I wonder, do you think that it has anything to do with it, or is it just kind of they would be just as rough, and it just happens that because the water, there's maybe slightly less chance of injury?
No, I think there's something to that because this and the other iterations of this, that are performed in the water, like the throwing the ball up that you have to like catch, where there's like a group of people out in the water that are trying to catch the launched particle and they're like knocking each other down. These, at least in my memory, tend to be the roughest of the challenges. So I think there's something to what you're saying is that you can go a little bit harder on somebody because you're not throwing them into the ground, So it also probably makes it look a little rougher to us because they are going a little bit harder. And if you did the same thing on land, these people would probably be getting injured. They're not, it's just but the exhaustion and the toll is the same. So that's why. Yeah.
And certainly, I guess maybe part of it too is because of the water, the challenge designers set the rules such that they can just totally grapple with each other that way.
Right.
As opposed to some other challenges where they might set rules about like what kind of things you can do.
Right. And I think that you underestimate it until you see it at the end, that running through knee-deep water is incredibly exhausting.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit reminiscent of the challenges where they've done where it's kind of like the race around the circle, where they're carrying weight and both teams are going around the circle, but one team is trying to catch up and like catch the back of the other team. Where we've seen how exhausted they get doing that, and that's just going around the circle. But so we got a pretty, even though they didn't score first, it was a pretty dominant showing by the purple team, ending up winning 3-1. Points scored by Spencer, Tasha, and Joe. Yeah. So Joe first, then Spencer, then Tasha with the winning point. Jeremy scored a point for the other team, which was the first point, but otherwise the winning team, Tasha, Spencer, Sierra, Abby, and Joe, seems to really just have it figured out. I
noted that, speaking of Jeremy and Joe, the last point, they had decided, Joe had decided, I guess, or one of them, I can't remember which one sort of initiated it. But they were going to neutralize each other.
Yeah.
So, but neither really looked like they were trying very hard to escape.
Yeah, there was at least like one shot where it's like
they're both just kind of like.
Well, yeah, like because I think Jeremy was kind of in like the controlling position, but yeah, Joe really didn't seem like he was struggling.
Right. It was almost like they both kind of wanted that to happen.
Yeah, they kind of agreed. It's like, we've been working really hard. Maybe we just let the girls handle this one. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, if we both take a knee, and then they can just do it, and we can have our consciences will be clear.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're right. There's several layers to it. There was I'm pretty tired, so I don't really want to fight this other really big, stronger guy.
Yeah.
Just to get myself involved again, only to fight more.
Mm-hmm.
And while I'm being neutralized, so is he, and I would like that as well. Since we have both scored a point, like I don't want him running around, and he doesn't want me running around. So let's just chill and get our energy back and let them fight it out.
Yeah.
Because that's part of why Joe, I think, was there, is that he didn't necessarily want Jeremy participating.
Well, right. I mean, even though he only ended up scoring once, Jeremy was obviously a very strong player.
Well, he didn't participate in all of them either because of the way the rotations work. So in the first one that he participated in, he did score. I think he came out one more time and didn't end up scoring because I don't know if it was Joe or somebody, but there was a little bit more of that, like trying to keep Jeremy out of it. And that's why Jeremy was like doing that to Joe, and they were like, well, this is also really tiring. It's even more tiring to fight the biggest guy. And this is probably what we both want anyway. So we're just going to So they did, like, even though they were in that position, I did picture them just kind of sitting there in the water.
Yeah. It's kind of like, okay, so if I struggle, you're going to struggle to keep me here. But if I don't struggle, you don't have to struggle. And we just agree that it's a tie.
And you're not going to get up. If I don't struggle, you're not just going to get up and assume that I'm not going to leave. You're not going to leave. You're going to stay here. So,
So if we're at a stalemate, we might as well just not work so hard.
So it just led to sort of an amusing looking.
Yeah, no, I agree. I noticed that too, although I hadn't made a note of it. So the winning team, Tasha, Spencer, Sierra, Abby, and Joe. So when we go on the reward, Sierra in particular gets emotional seeing the children at the circus. They just seemed they were also in attendance as opposed to circus performers. We didn't get to see a lot of the actual circus other than just a few quick shots of like acrobats and jugglers and stuff. But, looked pretty cool. And then, of course, food. But yet another problematic strategy session for Sierra where she wants to talk strategy with everybody, but one of the guys that everybody agrees needs to go is still there. It's kind of like what happened last time.
Yep.
But so at least with the people who are there, Sierra and Spencer agree that Steven, especially with his advantage, that's scary, and they're going to need to blindside him because they don't know what the advantage is. And it's notable that Jeremy and Kimmy are the other two that are considered part of that group that is not to be let in on this plan.
Yes.
Jeremy makes sense. Kimmy, we hadn't necessarily heard recently where she was, more definitively. I mean, she seemed like she was kind of over there, but, certainly what we saw from Kimmy in these two episodes indicates that she's tighter with Jeremy than we had really been told, I guess. But at the same time, we learned that just as it's crumbling a little bit. So Joe does want Steven out, but he is also in a position of like, I can't really trust anybody. But at the same time, what we know is that, if and when he gets to a point of losing immunity, he has to trust somebody. Or in the end, though, of course, this time it literally didn't matter because his vote got taken away. So it's just like it didn't matter who he trusted but I suppose he had been talking in that whole, deciding what the plan was going to be. So, although that whole, I'm impatient to talk about all that stuff, but we're still on the first episode. We have Kimmy talking about the time that she was with her son in the hospital to help her endure the rain, just in the sense of, I was able to survive that, so I can survive this. Here's where Steven is saying what everybody kind of knows, but it's just everybody, I think, still kind of psyching themselves up to say, hey, Jeremy, you'd be winning all those challenges if Joe wasn't here. Everyone, let's make sure we're still on the same page that Joe needs to go if he doesn't win. It's interesting that, like, even though I think almost everybody would have been on that page, it's like they have to remind themselves that he's not invincible.
Yeah.
So, let's see. So Steven, at this point, is where he's saying he feels like he's got a finger in every pot, and he does that thing that is it's the 2.0 of this phrase that has always used to happen, where someone would say, "Oh, I'm in a really good spot," and then it would turn out they're not in a good spot. Where this time he says, "I think I'm in a really good spot," and I know on Survivor, every time someone says they think they're in a really good spot, they're usually not. But I feel like I'm in a really good spot. I thought that was pretty funny.
It was pretty funny, especially considering the way things go down.
Yeah, exactly. And then, and it's very much immediate in terms of the episode, in the sense that, just in time for him to be feeling like he's in a pretty good spot, he starts having stomach problems as well as feet problems. And it changes his mood real fast, which is understandable. Feeling like stomach upset and, as he put it, gastrointestinal distress. Certainly, that's one of the hardest things to kind of fight through, I think. You just sort of, it just kind of ruins you for anything.
Right. Because you're always like, you might have to be called away,
Mm-hmm.
You can never really focus on anything.
You can't rest.
Yeah.
And it's like he has to keep going back out into the rain, even as miserable as their shelter is, he has to keep going out into the rain where it's even worse. And so, and we got another nice bit of editing where he says he's looking for a ray of hope. And then we cut to a horizon. Is the sun going to come out? Nope, it's another lightning bolt. But he insists, while crying, that he's not quitting. I kind of liked his determination there, that as miserable as he's feeling, he's still not giving up. And we also get Jeremy worried for him on both levels, first just as a human being with compassion and empathy, but also because, Steven is his ally, it's his guy. And he, as he puts it, he wants to keep loyalty around, well, I guess loyalty around himself is my phrase, not his. I'm not quoting him. That's how I wrote it. But yeah, just in the sense that he believes it's with so much discussion in these episodes, as has been all season, of the voting blocks versus alliance. It's interesting to see that Jeremy really all along has not been on board with this whole voting block thing. He's really always been thinking of it as the alliance that he really trusts, that he wants to keep with him. And then, he's almost really doing the Boston Rob model, even as his number one. Steven is the guy who's the number one proponent of the voting block idea.
But he's almost using that,
Yeah.
Where he was. Yeah.
Yeah. So the challenge time for immunity, and it was interesting. So we got to before the challenge, take one black rock and one white rock. And, we had seen this in the preview and wondered what it was going to be all about. I mean, my theory had been that, maybe with all the rain, they had to abort a challenge or something like that. Should have known better there. They do challenges in heavy rain sometimes.
Yes, I'm still here, by the way.
Okay.
Grabbing something. I'm listening.
All right. So in any case, we don't hear why right away. We get the challenge described first, which is a balance challenge, and have to balance on one foot, and I couldn't help but think that that looked miserable, especially for anyone whose feet might be messed up.
Yes. Which they happily showed us prior to the challenge that people had nasty feet.
Yep. So at least for this challenge, they had clear weather for the first time in days. And I loved that Steven talked about having his severe gastrointestinal distress. And you can hashtag that, he says, and then they don't.
See, I wasn't sure if they did or not because I actually watched the episode online, like through iTunes, because I'm moving, I have moved.
Yeah.
So that doesn't always have the hashtags. In fact, it doesn't have the hashtags in there.
Really?
That are in the live broadcast for some reason.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it doesn't have any of the stuff on the bottom. So like the ads and any of that stuff that pops up doesn't show up in that version. So any of the overlays. So I wasn't sure.
I was going to say, I didn't remember seeing any of them this week, but they didn't.
Okay.
I just was laughing because as soon as he said, and you can hashtag that, I was looking to see, are they going to put it up? But it is pretty long for a hashtag.
Yes. Well, and that's what I was saying was funny because I thought the exact same thing, but I wouldn't have known either way because they don't show me the hashtags. So I was curious. So I think it's funny to now know that they didn't actually hashtag it. Yeah. Well,
especially since maybe it was my imagination, but I felt like they hung on that moment just a little bit for us waiting to see, and then they didn't, and they just move on.
Probably. I mean, they're pretty clever. I mean, they're good. Yeah. They're very good editors.
Because they could have just cut out him saying that. They could have just cut away without him saying the rest of the sentence.
Yeah, they clearly acknowledged what they were doing. Like they left in the fact that he said you can hashtag that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so of course, if they lingered, they were probably thinking exactly that. Like,
although it occurs to me, it's that, when editing it together, it could be that they were hanging on it so that they would have time to put it up. And then, who knows? But it's pretty long for a hashtag. I'm not sure if you could even on like a phone, would that even all go on one line? I'm not sure. Maybe if you left off severe, but that's not what he said. He said severe gastrointestinal distress. Anyway, what the rocks are all about is a pretty awesome prisoner's dilemma type deal, I thought, where it's an offer to improve their shelter, which they all desperately want, but they need half of them, 5 of them, to volunteer to give up their shot at immunity. But they have to vote without knowing what everybody else is going to do, which is kind of cool. And so especially since I think everyone could guess that Joe's not going to give up his chance. But then you have to start saying, okay, I don't think I'm in danger. Maybe I don't think I'm likely to win the challenge anyway. So maybe I'm willing to give up mine. But do I want to give it up if do I think that there's enough other people who are going to do it? I don't want to risk doing the challenge and being like one of the only people who does. Like, what if only 4 people, wanted to give it up and then everybody else does the challenge and then everybody has to go back to the same shelter?
Right.
So, yeah.
And the flip side of that is you have to think, well, if I choose to do the challenge instead of helping the group, will people look at me more negatively because I did that? Regardless of whether they win or not.
Yeah.
Whether the shelter is actually improved. Like, if I'm one of only a couple people do the challenge, does that send the wrong message? Which is why ultimately I think everybody except Joe voted for the shelter for the reason you gave.
Keith also did the challenge. Yeah,
exactly. Well, and Keith had a great reason.
Yeah. I want to do the challenge.
I want to do the challenge. I came out here to compete, and I knew Joe was going to do it, and someone needs to compete against him. So that's why I did.
But, it's just funny because everybody who might be thinking that same thing has to wonder, how many other people are going to feel that way? Because if everybody had that same thought. Yeah. But, it was interesting to see that nobody really seems to hold it against Keith. I gather it's because he's not really a very proactive player to begin with, and so no one has to really ascribe any ulterior motives. You can pretty much take him at face value that what he said is why, and that's it. And they got enough people, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, he's not been known to be telling people false information. He is incredibly genuine. Mm-hmm. Harkening back to like when he wanted to go ride around on the tuk-tuk.
Yeah.
He's so just genuine about what he wants to do. So when he says something like, I came out here to compete and I wanted to compete in the challenge and try to beat Joe, everybody's like, well, yeah, that sounds like him.
Mm-hmm.
So that just.
Well, yeah, he seems to be going for the I want everybody on the prospective jury to like me ticket.
I'm not even sure if he's doing that. I think he's just like, this is what I want to do.
He's playing by being himself. The only way he knows how to play is to just be Keith.
Right. And I feel like, honestly, if he said that, if he made it to the final tribal and he said what you just said in the final tribal, hey, my game was to, get everybody to like me. I feel like it would be the reverse version of what we've talked about before, where you're ascribing strategic value to just doing what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be in a much more positive way, but I feel like that's exactly what it is. It's if he ascribes any strategic value to any of these things, it's literally just because he's doing what he feels like doing.
Mm-hmm.
and if there's strategic value to it, then great.
Yeah. So I was really thrilled with the whole prisoner's dilemma element of that. The end result being so lopsided, there could have potentially been more drama to come from it, but I loved the idea. And I think everyone is on board with being happy with the ultimate result that they get the new shelter, because, there's only so much we want to watch of them being miserable in a leaky shelter.
I would love to hear you try to give the listeners and or viewers a less than 60-second summary of the prisoner's dilemma.
Okay. Prisoner's Dilemma is a game theory intellectual, it's like a thought experiment where you imagine you have two prisoners, okay? And each one is told, we need you to confess to this. We want you to confess to this. Now, if you confess and your buddy doesn't, we think you did it together, but if you confess and your buddy doesn't, we'll give you half your sentence. But if you don't confess and your buddy does, we give you double sentence and him half sentence. Now, if you both confess, you both get full sentence. But if you both don't confess, we have to let you go because we can't prove who did it. And so the problem is you have to guess what your partner is going to do in order to try to maximize your own benefit. So you could confess hoping that your partner won't confess, knowing that that'll screw him over if he's loyal to you. Or do you think that he's going to betray you and confess, and therefore you'd better confess too, or else, so that's the thing, is that you have to, it's all about, loyalty versus betrayal, but also having to guess what your counterpart is going to do in order to determine your choice. And a lot of artificial intelligence discussions involve that sort of thought experiment, higher math.
As do a lot of business, like product development and marketing and things like that. Actually, there's a lot that relates to that, because it's,
How is I hadn't thought about the original description of it in a while. Did I describe it well?
Yes, that's why I was testing you, because again, while I know it as well, it's like, can you condense it when you're always referring to it? Can you actually describe the original problem on a moment's notice? And that sort of sparked me, and I was like, I wonder if I could. And I said, you know what? Rather than me try to do it, I'll have you try to do it.
Challenge accepted. So in any case, I liked that idea, and I would be interested to see them revisit it at some point. I'm not sure what circumstance would necessarily call for it, other than a similar situation here, but I like that kind of thing. In some ways, almost every vote they do is a little bit like that, because you have to, when you vote with someone, you are trusting that they're voting the way you think they're voting. And so there's always that element of, well, if I know they're voting for him, I could vote over here and change it. But that's only going to work if I'm right that that's who they're voting for. So that can all kind of come into play as well.
Yep.
So in any case, Joe and Keith are the only ones that vote to compete. Keith, as you mentioned, he's a competitor. He wants to win. Someone needs to go up against Joe, and then Joe says he considered giving it up, and everyone rolls their eyes. And then he also just kind of says, but I can take the reign. And then, of course, it's only at tribal council later where he basically just straight up admits, come on, everybody, don't give me a hard time. You know that if I gave up my chance, I would go home. Except now we know that that's maybe not true. So,
yep.
And anyway, so in the challenge, I thought that there was some nice editing attempts to make it look like it was remotely close, but Joe wins, not surprising anybody really. Immune again. And so before commercial, we get Steven commenting that Sierra then ought to be the next target, which, as it happens, works out for him, sort of. Not the way he would have planned it, I don't think.
No.
But in any case, they have a much, much nicer shelter when they come back to camp. And it's, not only is the part where they sleep bigger, but then it has this whole overall canopy so that they can keep their fire out of the rain as well, which I'm sure makes a huge difference. That they have the fire and it doesn't just go out whenever it rains. But Spencer talks about how the whole thing is really kind of like selling your soul to the devil, because that means since they're apparently not planning to target Keith, that means that whoever goes this next time is going to be someone who had voted to give up their chance at the challenge.
Yep.
So we have Joe, Spencer, and the three girls, and maybe Tasha included a little bit, talking about maybe getting rid of Steven. And then Abby insists on calling him Poopy Pants, which I was not thrilled with, but she seemed to think it was a lot funnier than everybody else did.
Yes.
They kept trying. She says, "You mean Poopy Pants?" I mean, Steven. Yeah, Poopy Pants. Okay. Anyway, so Tasha, though, is a little uncomfortable with that whole thing, goes to Spencer and saying, I'm concerned that Sierra is building a resume, a portfolio, if you will, of moves that she has engineered and made happen. And she's not wrong.
She's not wrong.
And then wanting to unhinge that trio and then have Wentworth and Abby as sort of, free agents that can then be scooped up into whatever alliance. And I think it's certainly a valid plan. Meanwhile, Spencer is determined that I think both the advantage and also this idea of Spencer and Jeremy and Steven made this really interesting dramatic trio. You know what I mean? Where it's kind of it's kind of like if Game of Thrones, where Jeremy's the king and he's got two competing advisors here that both think they should be able to direct the way it's really going. Oops, kind of lost my notes here. But in any case, I think both the idea that Stephen's advantage is dangerous because it's like, okay, I don't trust that he's going to stay with us to the end. And when he decides to move, whatever this advantage is going to make that all the easier for him to do. Not only that, but even if he was inclined to be loyal otherwise, that thing's going to be burning a hole in his pocket. So we gotta get rid of him. And, to some extent, that's probably true, and what he's thinking is that they need to make the move before Stephen starts thinking that way. So the problem is that, Jeremy's more inclined to say, but he's not thinking that way. And Spencer says, which is why we have to do it now before he does. But Jeremy's not wanting to preempt that. Not to mention the fact that even though Spencer wants to be in Jeremy's inner circle and has largely succeeded there, I think he probably recognizes through all this that he is not as close as those two are.
Right.
But yeah, so it's interesting that there's a lot of people being sure they're right and not wanting to listen to alternatives. Discussing, that's going on in there. And it's interesting too that there's still no one talking about voting for Jeremy, which is interesting. I've got to imagine that there's some reason people are not picking him. Like they think that he's not a threat for some reason.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, it's partly because he's assigned himself to Stephen. I mean, that's the reason why he's done that, is he wants, and why he likes having Joe there. He's shielded himself with the other physical threat and the other strategic threat.
Mm-hmm.
And so he remains out of conversation.
Yeah.
So I think it's partly his own manipulation of this. I have to give him some credit for that.
No kidding. I mean, however he's doing it, it's so obvious to us that he's masterminding a lot of this stuff in kind of a low-key way. But still, the fact that nobody is even bringing him up is interesting. And actually, when we get to the very end, there's something that, on that came up in Stephen's Ponderosa video that's on that subject a little bit. But I'll come back to that later. So in any case, so they bring in Jeremy to see if they can get him on board with getting rid of Stephen. And Jeremy is really not okay with that, despite the fact that it becomes clear that everybody else wants to do that. And so between Jeremy and Spencer, it's kind of just a referendum on Stephen's loyalty. And then Spencer says, as they go into tribal council, I thought this was interesting. Spencer saying, I hope Stephen goes home, but I don't know what is going to happen at tribal council. And I'm curious there what he thought might happen. I mean, because it seems like maybe it's just an element of they didn't get everybody locked down to his satisfaction. And so his concern maybe is we don't have, if Jeremy's going to vote for someone else, then it's possible that the rest of the group could mess it up somehow. But even still, they had 5. So just seems like they, without knowing about the idol, I'm not sure what they, but then again, I suppose it's true that,
well, it goes back to what you were saying. You have to trust that people are going to be voting the way that they told you they were going to be voting.
Mm-hmm.
not 100% confident that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And maybe it's just an element of him recognizing that Jeremy is a strong player and this feeling of he and I are both 100% certain of our respective positions. Neither of us really ever backed down and got agreement from the other. So I think I've got this plan in place, but I don't know what he's running around doing when he disagrees with my plan. I suppose that's where that was coming from. But so in any case, at Tribal Council, Sierra gives a fairly good politician's none answer about giving up their chance, where she talks a lot and uses the right words without actually saying anything. And then Tasha just tries to spin it as being unselfish, which, it's probably at least mostly true. But, it's one of those things where it's easier to be unselfish when the stakes are lower. When you don't think that you're likely to be the one in trouble. But this is where Joe was just saying, okay, come on, you guys. I would have gone home for sure if I gave up my shot. And so then there's some discussion about Stephen's advantage. And what we hear later is that both Stephen and Jeremy seemed convinced at that point that the whole thing was turning against Stephen.
Right.
Stephen even indicated that that's what he thought was going to happen. And it was clear, too, that when they were discussing that advantage, both Stephen and Jeremy looked uncomfortable. Like, we don't really want this to be the focus of the conversation because that would be a reason to vote out Stephen. So, but it was interesting that nobody seems to think that they were the target. So Jeff was kind of like, this would almost have to be a blindside because nobody thinks they're in danger. I can't really remember a time when it's been quite like that.
No, it's usually the other way, where people who have no reason to be worried are worried.
Yeah. So in any case, we vote, and so is anyone going to play an idol? Anyone? And then, of course, Jeremy, hey, Jeff, cut to commercial. Because they like to mess with us.
But when you buy it on iTunes, it doesn't matter because it just loads the next scene.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the commercials.
So in any case, Jeremy plays the idol for Stephen. And Stephen is stunned, had no idea. Says thank you. Everyone else seems more amused than anything else. Unlike some times where stuff like this happens and you see people really devastated, everyone else is just kind of like, whoa, okay, kind of impressed. I think partly just because everything was sort of so up in the air that nobody really felt like, oh, well, if he's okay, then it must be me. It's more just kind of like, okay, now we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So in any case, 5 votes for Stephen, none of them counted. So the split votes between Sierra and Kimmy. Again, it wasn't really clear how that all, like what we didn't really get a lot of the breakdown of what the other side's plans were. But in any case, Kimmy gets 2 votes. Sierra gets 3 votes. She goes. She says, well played to everybody. Jeremy immediately in damage control, leaning over to Spencer saying, I would have done the same for you. This is where I noted that trio of guys, there's some high drama going on there, just in the sense that both of them seem to be competing for Jeremy's affection in this weird way. Weird only in the sense that there's not any particular reason why they should.
Right.
Especially since like Jeremy is just as much a threat to both of them as they are to each other. Although I suppose when you think about it in terms of archetypes, you know what I mean? It's like you need to eliminate the other people that are playing the way that you do.
Exactly.
But so Kimmy also voted for Sierra. And So then when we get back to camp, lots of discussion of sneaky Jeremy. Everyone seems pretty impressed because nobody knew he had the idol. He successfully hid it. And I think it's extra funny that he still has one and nobody knows either.
Yeah. I remember, by the way, real quick, what the other side was doing with the Kimmy votes.
Yeah.
I did look this up at the time of the episode, and so I pulled it back up now because I couldn't remember. I didn't actually write the note of what had happened. It looks like, again, probably because Jeremy was orchestrating it and knew the idols were out there. It's a 5-5 split, really, where the 1-5 split it 3-2. Or no, that's not the case at all, because Sierra voted for Kimmy, and so did Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly, Wentworth, and Sierra, and I would have expected Abby to all vote together.
Abby voted for Steven. So no, that didn't. It made sense that night when I was watching it because it was after Thanksgiving dinner and all this kind of stuff, and I just looked at it and I was like, oh, that makes sense. But now that I look at it a little more carefully, I'm not 100% sure what happened.
Yeah. I think it's possible that they wouldn't have ordinarily approached Abby.
Were Sierra and Kelly just not included? Why would they think they needed to vote for Kimmy?
Yeah, I don't know. See, that's why I was a little bit unclear too. I think we just really didn't get a lot from that side of the people who were left out of this initial discussion of, is it Steven or is it Sierra?
Yeah, because it doesn't really work from a vote splitting standpoint, obviously, since Sierra.
I think we can't put too much weight into why Abby voted for Steven because she has shown herself to be kind of unpredictable. So even if her whole trio was supposed to be voting for Kimmy, she may have just decided mid-tribal council that she was going to change her vote.
So that would make sense. So they were planning on a 4-3 split, meaning that if Steven played an idol, that Sierra and Kimmy, or whoever in Kimmy, because they wouldn't have known it was Sierra, would be tied. And then they would go do whatever the tiebreaker is at this point in the season. But Abby might have just really wanted Steven gone that bad that said, I don't want to tie. I'm just going to vote for Steven, which ended up sending Sierra home. That's potential.
Excuse my coughing. I'm getting over a cold. But yes, I was a little bit confused by all that too. But I think it's just ultimately that the majority was deciding between Steven and Sierra, and various people were brought in for one side or the other, and a couple of people left out altogether. Yeah, I don't know. It's confusing. So in any case, okay, I'm backing up. I think probably what the plan is that the majority was planning to split. Now, see, because, yeah, so I still think what it is that everyone except Wentworth, Abby, and Sierra was planning to vote out Sierra except for this secret plan to get out Steven instead. And so part of that majority that was going to get Sierra joined with some of the others to vote out Steven because that was the blind side. Anyway, I almost don't feel like we're going to solve it because some of it's confusing.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
Onward. But
we also know that Abby would have been predisposed to want to vote for Steven anyway because she hasn't liked him for some time. So, and that actually just reminds me of something that happens later. But so everyone's impressed. No one had any idea about the idol. Steven is now kind of humbled for a number of respects, like one, that he hadn't been feeling well. He had no idea about the idol. He had no idea that anyone was going to target him. And so he's basically just, his whole game is upended a little bit because almost everything he thought he knew for sure turned out to not be very solid at all.
Yeah, his whole good spot got eradicated really quickly.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Jeremy wants to reassure Spencer, saying, just because I didn't tell you about the idol, just because I played the idol to undercut your plan to go behind my back, let's not freak out, okay? Let's still be buddies. Don't be paranoid. Which, I don't know, it's kind of, that's a long shot. This seems like it would be a hard thing to really salvage a really solid relationship from, but so Spencer at this point is kind of inclined to say, yeah, I'm increasingly thinking that this is not maybe where I need to be, which is an interesting way to feel, given that he had just orchestrated something that went directly against the wishes of Jeremy. Just because Jeremy managed to veto him with an idol didn't, it's kind of like you were still the person who was going against him first. Anyway, at the same time that anyone could have always actually gone against Jeremy directly, but nobody ever seems to talk about that. So we get to a nighttime challenge, a rare nighttime challenge. Trivia questions and races through the jungle. I thought it was really cool looking.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they should do this kind of challenge more often, because I think it's interesting to watch in a number of levels. And then they deliberately set it up too, so that it's kind of like we get to hear the whole story, and then we get to see each of the questions of so we can play along a little bit. Do we remember each answer? The reward would be a helicopter ride to a resort for steaks and chicken wings. At least that I noticed, Keith and Joe were the only two people to get a single question wrong twice, meaning to choose both of the wrong answers before getting the right one.
Yeah.
And then at one point where Probst is like, Joe doing terrible in this challenge. And then Joe's just like, thanks, Jeff. But my favorite moment was when Abby runs up so Abby's at the question and doesn't seem to know for sure what the answer is. Steven runs up and just opens one, and then she grabs one from that pot and then runs away, and then he closes it and gets one from the other one. Sorry, Abby. I thought that was just funny. The idea that, she's just going to copy my answer. So fake out. I thought that was great. And then so Spencer could have won it, except that out of all 5 questions, the only one that he guessed wrong on even once was the last one. And he would have won, except for that he had to go back on the last one. And so he and Steven neck and neck, both racing to unwrap their last little thing. That was pretty dramatic. It also seemed like those things were harder to unwrap than I would have guessed them to be.
Yes.
Because especially that last one that turned out to be wrong, Spencer seemed like he was fiddling with it for a long time. So Steven wins. Excuse me. So at this point, Steven gets one of these classic Survivor conundrums of, do you want to win the challenge where you pick people to come with you or to not come with you? And so what do? And it was interesting, especially given all the talk about voting block versus alliance, that Steven was really kind of back and forth on the whole thing all along. You know what I mean? Because he's always been the one all along saying that it's the voting block. But then he's also now recognizing, oh, well, my relationship with Tasha wasn't as close as I thought it would be, so I need to repair that bond, which is more like an alliance thing. And then his other choice is Jeremy, my other good buddy. You know?
The voting blocks thing worked for him until he became the target.
Mm-hmm.
And then he realized having an alliance is kind of important.
Need someone to have your back. So in any case,
well, considering that Jeremy saved his ass, basically.
Yeah,
totally
totally
had his back. Like,
as dramatically as can really be done in this game.
Yes.
Like that's not even just like, oh, I warned you, you were in trouble, I'm going to help you vote so that you don't go home. It's more like this extremely special thing that I have and nobody else even knows that I have. I'm going to give it up in order to save you.
Yep.
I wonder how actually, now that Steven's gone, I wonder if Jeremy wishes he hadn't used his idol on him.
Probably,
you know what I mean?
But,
you can't second guess those things. You have no way of knowing in advance, especially since, we'll get to it, but Steven practically voted himself out. In any case.
Not 100%.
I know, not 100%, but certainly he could have helped his case and didn't.
Yeah.
So in any case, Spencer is concerned that, okay, choosing them and not me, but seeming to choose people explicitly based on wanting a closer, tighter relationship and not including Spencer. It's like, oh, okay, I see where this is. I see how this goes.
Yeah, this is going back to like being an alliance.
Yep. And he needs to do something about it, he says. And there's also lots of joking that Steven's feet didn't seem to be so bad when he needed to run in the challenge. Keith said he ran like a deer. The other thing that happened during the challenge that was kind of exciting is just randomly, Kelly Wentworth finds an idol clue in one of her little discs. I can't help but wonder, it's just kind of like, how did they make sure someone was going to find one? Maybe they just like the one that was on top of one of the right answers or something, so they could just be sure that someone was going to grab that one.
Or maybe they weren't sure.
Yeah. Well, it's always possible, too, that someone could have grabbed that one and then not even realize there's that piece of paper in it.
Yep.
Or what if there was even more than one clue? Like, we only saw one person, only Kelly found it, but what if there was more than one of them? Could have had more than one person with the same clue. That could have been fun.
That's kind of what I was thinking, is that they set it up where everyone potentially could have found a clue.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I'm not sure that it was definitely on top of like a right answer. Like everyone probably had one in a pot somewhere. And it was just about whether or not you got lucky and found it.
Well, but see, I was thinking that it still works because they all have to visit, there's 5 stations, and they all have to visit each station at least once, right? And so if you put it on top of the right answer of one, then it's really just a matter of who goes and gets that one right first. Which it could have been anybody. It's just who went to that station first and got the right answer. No,
you're right. That would make sense. I didn't remember if Kelly found that on her first station or not.
They didn't say. We were told midway through the challenge that she found it, but they didn't say which one.
Okay. Because that would make sense also.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's also possible that it might not have been her first one, but for example, let's say someone else ran and got the wrong answer on that one. And then her second one is when she ran to that one, but no one else had got the right answer from that one yet.
Right. What we don't know is if the right answer at that station, she was the first person to find it.
Right. Yeah, they just didn't say. It's hard to know.
That would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so that was very exciting, and especially for her to find it again, since it's kind of. So And the clue says that the idol is fastened to the underside of their new shelter floor, which I thought was excellent synchronicity, them just having got this new shelter, and all of that. And that we've talked in the past about it being kind of a cool idea to hide the idol right in the middle of camp. It's been a while since they've done it that way, but I like that.
I do, and I like this whole idea that like they've really worked hard to make it where you can't find the actual idol unless you have the clue. Like it's just it's not in a place where you would get it.
Yeah.
Like Jeremy's, like you said, he was the only one who was allowed to find it. That was one. There was you can find the clue, but then you had to. But then it didn't exist. I don't even think it existed at the challenge unless someone had the clue. So they prevented that. So you could still do the random idol search, but you would only get a clue and then still have to execute, which made it a little more complicated. And this is the same thing. Like you could stumble upon this clue, but no one was going to find that idol the way that where they put it, just accidentally.
Right, and they probably only put it there because she found the clue.
Once someone had the clue, right.
Yeah.
They've done a great job of identifying something that was, while interesting, kind of took away from the gameplay when there was like too much of the, we're just going to go search for idols.
Yeah.
And they've allowed that random search to exist, but they've made it much more difficult to actually just go walk around in the woods and find an idol.
Yeah, yeah.
Which I like. I mean, they evolve the show very well,
So, she plans to try to go for it. First of all, she's saying, well, at night I can't even see, so I'm not going to try to do that. Not to mention the fact that everybody's here. Everybody's going to be hanging out at the shelter. So tomorrow, when 3 people will be away at the reward, hopefully she can get a moment to herself. Steven, on the reward, talks to Tasha, and in an attempt to reunite them as an alliance pair, decides to share what his advantage is with her and Jeremy. And they all 3 agree that Joe needs to go as soon as he loses. Like 50 other conversations that have been had this season already. Everyone says, as soon as Joe loses, he's got to go.
So, of course, that's going to happen.
Right, yeah. But so it seems like it's making a difference in the sense that both Tasha and Jeremy, and they seem like, yep, they're together as a group. That's what it seems like. Back at camp, Kimmy, who's kind of the member of that group that was left out of the reward, and everybody kind of knows it. They're kind of trying to say, well, Steven, he took Tasha and Jeremy and not you. And Kimmy's like, oh, I don't think the choices make that much, but it really comes across as maybe it does matter and you're defending them, which just is all the more reason for us to believe that you're with them. But I don't know. The Spencer still is determined to get rid of Steven because he still has his advantage, and it didn't work last time. And Steven seems to have not picked up on the idea that it's Spencer's ringleading this whole thing to get rid of him.
Yeah, because he's so fixated on Joe.
Well, and what's weird is that Jeremy knows that. So why wouldn't Jeremy have made that more clear? Maybe he's just worried that Steven's already too paranoid. Jeremy's determined to try to get everybody back to being a happy family.
Maybe.
Because it's certainly true that if Jeremy's plan is, I want both my guys, I want Spencer and Steven together working with me, and if I tell Steven that it was Spencer trying to get him out, that won't work. So maybe that's why I didn't say. Because that was the other thing that, that I mentioned earlier that I would bring up later, is that in Ponderosa, Stephen was shocked to hear from Sierra that targeting him was Spencer's idea. He had no idea that Spencer was trying to get him out.
Wow.
He didn't, not even after he got voted out. He hadn't pieced it together. So, and in fact, part of the reason I mentioned it earlier too is what he asked Sierra was, why did you guys target me and not Jeremy? And that's when Sierra says, it wasn't even me. We were going along with it so that it wouldn't be us. It was Spencer's idea. And Stephen was really surprised. But what I thought was interesting about that is just, I feel like that is the first time in anything that anybody's even talked about voting for Jeremy, which is weird. And so apparently even Stephen, who is in the game, thinks it's weird. Why target me instead of him? Excuse me. I think that's a little bit of a dumb question, though, because the obvious answer is because you had the advantage.
Yeah,
that's why. But still, the fact that nobody's even mentioning Stephen or Jeremy remains weird. So we have Abby starting to get paranoid again. And then that whole weird thing of like to Joe is like, well, why don't you let me win the challenge tomorrow? And he's just like, no. And I guess Abby was sure that because Sierra was voted out last time, that means that she would be next. That seems to be where her anxiety comes from. Now, that plus the fact that they do actually decide to tell Joe that she's the target, like she's the decoy. Except that they also seem actually like she's not just the decoy, she's also the split in case Joe has an idol or something.
Right.
So we can understand why she would have some anxiety about that. It's reasonable that she'd be at least a little bit paranoid. But she also, when they keep trying to reassure her, she's just got some sort of a passive-aggressive kung fu going on, where she's insisting to everybody that she's fine and it's totally okay. And you don't have to keep bothering me. There's nothing wrong with me. Is there something wrong with you? And they're just like, I don't even know how to talk to you. You leave me confused as to what I'm even trying to convince you of.
Yep.
So in any case, let's see. That was actually comes a little bit later, but so they're all talking about in that group saying that it should be Stephen or Tasha if Stephen gets immunity. And again, Joe is this weird strategy singularity where like everybody kind of knows that he's really the target, except that if he's sitting there with you, you have to pretend that he's not. It's weird. But in any case, Joe and Spencer decide to go fishing, and then Keith and Kimmy decide to go for snails and crabs, and Wentworth is saying, all right, we've almost got everybody out of camp, except Abby's just hanging around. We got some great reaction shots of her looking frustrated behind Abby's back. Excuse me, I'm going to get some water. Just one moment. You can talk a little bit to everybody while I do that.
Not as good at this as Chris is. Let's look at what Chris has unpacked so far. Clearly the PlayStation has been unpacked, but the box remains. There's some chairs back there that have not been set up correctly.
Okay, so I'll have to listen back to see whatever that was. So in any case, where was it? Where were we? So
Abby
finally, Abby goes to lay in the hammock, and Kelly Wentworth has her opportunity. And I think probably the editing and the narration might make it look even tenser than it really was. But no question that she was really stressed out, worried that someone was going to spot her. Because, as you were kind of mentioning, nobody's going to, like, there's no reason to go under the shelter like that unless you're doing something untoward. You know, like, even if you wanted to try to say, oh, I dropped something under there, that's just going to make someone say, oh, here, let me help you look.
Yeah.
So, but in any case, she finds it. Yay. And that's it's kind of funny too when you see the same people get more than one idol, because like Jeremy got two, and now Kelly has her second. As a reminder to anyone who forgot, she had one previously, but then played it to save herself in episode 8.
Yes.
2 weeks ago. So now she has another one. And again, it's another one that nobody has any idea she has. It's definitely seems like the current trend is to not tell anybody about idols, as opposed to there was a few seasons where everyone used it by like, you know, I will tell you about my idols so that you'll trust me, that sort of thing. But I kind of think that not telling anybody has got to be the smarter play, because sharing a secret may have some impact of getting someone to trust you more, but then there's always that tension of like, yeah, but what good does that do me? Would you play it for me? Can I rely on that? And it just can almost become this tension.
Right, which we've seen a few times that people have not done that.
Yeah.
You'll ask for it and you're like, no.
It's mine. There's even times where it's kind of like two people kind of find it together, but one person's holding it. So in any case, though, she does get it. It's time for the next challenge, the immunity challenge, and they get to stack blocks with their feet, and we get lots of cuts to a stricken-looking Steven as they describe the challenge. No, it's like, here, do all these things with your feet, and cut to him going, yeah, and then it's really hard to do things with your feet. Cut to Steven. Making faces. So this was a challenge where Keith and Jeremy had done it before, and it was Jeremy's last challenge before being voted out on his previous season. This one was nice and tense towards the end, especially given Spencer being the last one by a significant margin to even get the blocks dropped. It's kind of surprising to have him pull it out at the end.
Yes.
And I don't know.
He did, because if we're sort of, you know, and at least I am sort of rooting for him to win. You know, you want him to have a few challenges under his belt. Yeah, I agree. Well, yeah. And also just in terms of making the show dramatically interesting, we've been talking about it for so long. We want to know what's going to finally happen if Joe doesn't win immunity. My next note was literally now to see if everybody makes the smart move. Well, nope. Not everybody did. I'm really kind of. It's an interesting qualifier because they did burn Steven's advantage. That's true. And he is strategically like a hell of a threat, and it's not to say like it. I don't think that getting rid of Steven is not the smart move, is what I'm trying to say. Well, certainly Steven is also a threat. But the problem is someone who theoretically might just win every subsequent immunity challenge from here on out, get to the final, and then win. If that happens, everybody's going to feel real dumb. Yes. Because, although it's also true theoretically that Joe's going to lose again next time and get voted out. And if they hadn't gotten rid of Steven this time, what if he just ran the table and, well, not with challenges necessarily, but if he ended up winning, then people might have
looked back on this vote and say, boy, we were so focused on Joe. We didn't see Steven sneaking up there. So it's easy to, armchair quarterback, I suppose. But at the same time, it's just one of those things where there have been so many conversations already of people talking about, well, Joe's the threat. Joe's the threat. We want to get out Joe if only he doesn't win immunity. But, he won immunity. We have 5 or 6 weeks in a row where we're talking tonight that way. This is the first time that he's up for voting.
Maybe everybody didn't believe that as strongly as because the people who were on that, the people who were the most vocal about that still voted for Joe.
Yeah. Well, and then, yeah.
And when it comes down to it, Joe is I don't want to say he's not truly a one-trick pony because of how he has navigated his way out of this stuff. But when you're going into it, you're saying, okay, look, if we don't get rid of Steven's advantage and get rid of him with it, that has long-term implications. Mm-hmm. Joe is simply, we're rolling the dice that the guy is not going to win every immunity. And while that is a tough odds, that's a little bit more in our control. That's how I look at it. You get to beat Joe. And you can kind of look at it and say, you know what? If we've got 8 more challenges or whatever the hell are left, and we can't beat him in one of them, then yeah, we deserve to lose. But if we've got this thing out there that we're not that Steven's got, we're not entirely sure like how it works and could mess up other plans, like that's a cloud you don't really want when you can always hold we're guessing Joe's not going to go 8 for 8. And if he does, fuck it,
Yeah.
So I don't want to say it's not the smart move. Yes, it's something that everybody knows has to happen at some point. And I know that if you wait too long and then it doesn't happen, at the same time, there was a glaring reason to not vote for him this time. And that was Steven's advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where I fall,
I guess I can see that. I don't know. I just sort of felt like, they made a plan and then it fell apart at the last minute because they weren't sufficiently organized or they were more paranoid or, target of opportunity instead of the real threat. Because honestly, I feel like sitting from where we are, I still think like if Joe and Steven were both still in the game and I'm imagining myself as someone who has to compete against them, I feel like I want to get Joe out before I get out Steven because if Joe just keeps winning immunities, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, and see, I fall the other way.
Fair enough. It's a judgment call either way, obviously.
Yeah, I'm saying, you know what? The guy's not going to win 8 in a row, and goes back to the whole it's not really like game theory. I was going to say, but I have an influence in what happens. Like I get to compete against Joe 8 more times. If I can't beat him 1 out of 8, when they start getting less. Physical, there's more endurance, there's mental, there's all these other pieces that come in. If I can't beat him 1 time out of 8, then you know what? Great. Good for him. That's how I feel. So.
Yeah. So in any case, though, I was still certainly feeling at this point in the episode like they're all dumb if they don't manage to get Joe out this time. That's how I felt at this point in the episode. You make a good case though that Steven's advantage, like Spencer was saying, it's something that could really screw everything up if played smartly, unlike the way it was actually played. Which I don't want to give Steven too hard a time on exactly, but it's like if you have to know what the other people are doing.
He did kind of waste it.
Yeah. So in any case, I was thinking at this point, Stephen and Spencer finally have something to unite them. They can both work together to get out Joe. Except
not what happened.
Not what happened, no. They plan to tell Joe that it's Abby, but he's not that dumb. I mean, he's like, of course you're going to tell me that. So Wentworth's plan is to save Joe, who she wants to save, by blindsiding Stephen. Joe, I think, is just, by virtue of him kind of being a little bit on the outside, due to all of this talk of, as soon as he loses, we're going to vote him out, she's able to say, well, hey, work with us. You know, if you have us with you, then it's not a guarantee. And so they want to blindside Stephen in order to eliminate that advantage. When Stephen goes to tell Abby, don't worry about us saying your name because it really is Joe, and we know that he means it, but she doesn't believe him.
That's just not how you manage Abby.
No, it's not. It's like, I almost don't like. I almost feel like they should have said they're targeting Wentworth. Because I almost don't think that there was going to be any way. Like, if you need Abby to vote with you, if you are depending on her vote to make your plan work, you need to not have anything that could set her off. And telling anybody that her name is on the table is just going to push all those buttons.
We saw that with Sierra.
Yeah.
She was not originally the target, but she, however many, 8 episodes ago, that's what started this whole streak of her just getting up in everything. Like, she didn't want her name written down. She didn't want Savage saying, and by the way, we're all going to say we're voting for you, and some of us are going to, but, it's not you. She didn't like that,
Right, yeah.
And Abby's even more emotional.
So, at this point, Stephen is feeling like, okay, that's not working. What do we do? And then so Abby, by going and confronting various people, is kind of unknowingly helping convince Stephen to convince Joe that Abby is the real target, because she's so sure that she is almost doing what they would want her to do if she was on board, except that because she's not doing it that way, they don't know what she's actually going to do. Because if it was an act, they would want her, like, if they could depend on her, they would say, act like it's you, so that we can convince Joe so that he doesn't scramble, but then really vote with us. But when it's not an act, who knows what she might do. And then so Abby says she doesn't even know who she's going to vote for. It's just going to have to come down to tribal council. Wentworth is alarmed. He's trying to reassure her, but it just seems to antagonize her further, because she's got it so in her head that she is the real target. It's almost like a conspiracy theory, right? Anything anyone says to the contrary is just part of the cover-up. Spencer tries to reassure her also. This is where I wrote that she was doing some kind of a passive-aggressive kung fu of insisting so strenuously that everything is fine that it just derails the whole conversation. And it's like, wait, what were we even talking about? Like, it's been a while since we had Abby like this. Stephen, let's see. In the meantime, Stephen, like, it's weird that, like, both sides of this whole, this secret war going on, both of them are now alarmed and concerned about Abby being unpredictable, because Stephen is talking to Jeremy about saying, I think I need to use my advantage because we have no idea what she's going to do. Um, and then, so at that point, he also goes and tells Spencer about it. And Spencer at that point is, I guess, happy to be told what the advantage is specifically, but also like, that's going to be tricky to to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
We were kind of hoping we could vote you out without you using your advantage, because that was kind of the whole idea here. But so if you're planning to use it, okay, let's figure that out. But in the end, I mean, it may well be that that was Stephen's crucial failing. And that may be what led him to use it the way that he did, is Spencer's reassurance that that's what he should do with it. Because as I mentioned in the Ponderosa, Stephen had no idea that Spencer was working against him.
Which could be very good for Spencer. The way that Stephen, like, I think Stephen will respect that when it comes down to if Spencer makes it and Stephen's on the, obviously Stephen's on the jury, but if Spencer makes it and Stephen's making his choice on the jury, that might be something that gets his vote,
Yeah. My note at this point going into tribal council is just, this is crazy. I felt like I had lost all track of what, like, okay, what are the actual different groups? What are they all planning to do now? Because I had always thought that Abby was supposed to be just the decoy, but then that evolved into, do we need to split the vote because Joe might have an idol? I wonder if Spencer influenced that because he knew that that's what he would need in order to make his plan happen.
I mean, that's what they clearly did. So,
yeah.
And to the point where Stephen even split his own double vote,
which is just bizarre. But again, it must have all been about, you are still stealing the vote, and then just this idea of going forward with the plan, which is splitting the votes. But it's because he had no idea that there were people in what he thought was his group working against him. So in any case, it was interesting in the tribal council for Joe to kind of talk about, is like, well, I just have to trust and hope, not going to scramble, which, he's got, and see, this is why he's not just challenges though. You know what I mean? It's like, it is him working with people that is part of what led to him not, people feeling like they can work with him. Because if he was really just the challenge guy and completely on the outside in every other respect, I think he still would have been the target.
Mm-hmm. He's done well with his second chance. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I think he's, especially now that it's been made clear that he is not necessarily the automatic choice if he doesn't win immunity. Who knows how far he might go now. So this is Abby still agitated, talking about how there are still alliances. There's obviously alliances, and you have to go with who's the most loyal to you. So, and then Tasha also starts to question the voting block. She wants to go back to having a tight alliance of who you can really trust to get to the end. Lots of people reacting to that. But then, so we're going back and forth on voting blocks versus alliances. I didn't really have any other notes until Stephen plays his advantage. Did you?
No.
So he decides to steal Joe's vote, which makes sense since presumably that's who he's trying to get voted out. So whatever it is that he's doing, take that off the table. Joe declares that it sucks, but that's the game, so it's good. Which it was a fun kind of, we got to see him do that whole little emotional response turnaround thing of, because that when he said it sucks, he did not look like it was good. he had to talk himself back into that, you know. We got to see that whole little sweep. It was nice. But then I just when he split his own 2 votes, I was just like, no, you have no idea. Oh no. I was I felt like I was rooting for Steven there, not necessarily like wanting him to win, but just sort of, I guess I don't know. I felt like I was rooting for him to have the advantage work to his benefit. And I just felt like splitting the 2 votes that you get works. It almost really dilutes the power of the whole thing.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah. And I guess it still makes sense if you're sure that the plan is to split the votes, that you could, because, you know, if you vote 2 votes for Joe and he has an idol, but and it's also true that we knew then that Wentworth had a new idol and wanted to save Joe. So it was theoretically possible that she could have played it to save Joe. She didn't, but
no, she did. It feels like she knew that, or felt confident that they were going to go.
Well, because this whole plan to vote Steven was really that was not part of the more public discussion, right? But so in any case, when we get the votes, there were 3 votes for Abby, 2 votes for Joe, and 4 for Steven. So if Steven had voted both votes for Abby, it would have tied with the votes for himself. Now, again, I suppose it's hard to be, because if he had voted both together, it would have that would not have saved him, and it would have been Joe, presumably, that he would have tried to vote out. So that's why it's not necessarily.
Wait, how would he have gotten 4 votes for Joe?
He couldn't have. That's what I'm saying, is if he had voted both of his votes for Abby instead of 1 for each, there would have been 4 votes for Abby.
He could have gotten Joe. He could have gotten Abby.
Yeah, yep. He could have gotten a tie with Abby. But that's the best that he could have done with what everyone else was voting. And ultimately, you know, it's just 4 votes was enough to get him out.
Yeah.
Because of the split. You know, that's what can happen when you have a 6 or a 5 and 4 split. But yeah, so that's where it's hard to beat him up too much and say things like he voted himself out, because if he had voted both of his votes together for the other person that was supposed to just be the backup in case of an idol, then it would have been a tie. So it's like, yeah, that's some mind reading stuff. You couldn't have predicted that that's what he would need to do. Like if he had seen 4 votes for himself coming, he would have probably tried to do something else entirely.
Right.
Excuse me. Goodness.
Computer's about to die, so.
Oh no. So well, we're getting close then. So he is immediately kind of saying, "Nice job, guys. Nice blindside." And what I'll say too is that in his Ponderosa video, he is relieved to be out of the game. I think just the paranoia and also just the conditions were wearing on him so much that it was just like taking off a heavy backpack as soon as he was out of the game. And he seems like he's not only not bitter, but he's just kind of like, whew, glad that's done. You know, he would have liked to go further, but at the same time, he's also not bummed to not have to go back to that rainy shelter.
Right.
He jokes in thanking his fans for sending him out a second time to do worse and be emotionally scarred. Because, of course, he was second place in his previous season. But yeah, so in any case, like I said, earlier, he also revealed that he really, even after being voted out, had no idea that it was Spencer leading the charge there.
Okay.
So next time we get the loved ones, but also apparently an accident happening in the challenge that requires medical to come out, including taking someone's pulse with the finger thing. That's alarming.
Always.
Yeah. So hopefully that turns out to not be as bad as it seems to be from the preview, but we'll have to see. I think that does it then for this episode of Talking About Survivor. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. Remember, you can find both the video version and the audio version at christianaellis.com, and we'll be back next week to talk about episode 12. All right. Good night.